One of the most fantastic things about this conference is we've had the opportunity to bring a number of extraordinary students over the years to speak about like totally awesome projects. Joining that totally awesome club is Abeer ElBahrawy, a PhD student at City University of London. She's also an enrichment student at the Alan Turing Institute. Prior to that, she did both her bachelor's and her master's degree in operations research at Cairo University, and she spent time working at Chain Analysis Incorporated. And we're going to hear some about her work deriving from that here. She will tell us about coordinating in the dark. Let's welcome her.
Okay, hello everyone, my name is Abeer, and I'm going to talk today about coordinating in the darks, and in the dark we are specifically speaking about a marketplace called dark markets. So these marketplaces started with Silk Road. So Silk Road, you can think of it as an Amazon for drugs, to some extent, where you have different sellers and different buyers who can buy all sorts of illicit goods, mainly drugs in case of Silk Road. And they can even review their purchase and say, for example, well, we really enjoyed this, the package was great, it delivered very well, and so on. And these marketplaces are living on dark nets, which means that you have to use a specific browser in order to access. And they started in 2011. And they actually have different kind of illicit goods. So the majority are drugs, but you can find, in some cases, stolen credit cards, IDs, sometimes even weapons. And the most important thing that I want to stress here is that Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency that's universally accepted in these markets. There are some cases where other cryptocurrencies can be used. However, the main usage is in Bitcoin. However, this did not last. So in 2013, the first law enforcement raid happened to Silk Road, which led to the seizure of $23 million, and the administrator of this particular market was arrested. However, that was not the end of the story. Well, I wouldn't be here. So after the closure of Silk Road, like right 2 months before it, actually, there is another market that started called Cheap Marketplace. And then another market started called Panadora Marketplace, and then, surprisingly, Silk Road 2 Marketplace. And it kept going on. So there are so many of these markets right now. They have different features, they have different kind of specialties, and they have different administrators, of course. And then we look 6 years later. Specifically in May this year, May 2019, another raid that happens with law enforcement from the US, the Dutch government, and Germany, which closed the Wall Street market. So the problem's still there. Dark market's clearly still there. And that specifically led us to our questions. So what is the effectivity of these closures? And here I'm going to show you that closures almost have no impact on the survivors of these dark markets. And what is the adaptation mechanism? So how are the users of this market are able to survive and continue trading on these dark markets? And I'm going to show you that actually influential traders migrate systematically to nearby markets. So how do we investigate this? So traditionally, the work that focused on dark markets used dark market scraps. So what researchers do is that they go to a dark market, and they start having a crawler or a scrapper that extract all the reviews from this dark market. And they try to infer from these reviews the quantity, the product, and the time of the sales. So for example, you have a review here. It's not super clear, but you have a review at Monday, 20th of September, 2017. And the guy is saying, oh, I had a really good time having this ... drug. And the packaging was great. And from this, they can infer what kind of quantity they can have and what kind of time this purchase was sold. So it's some sort of an estimation of the actual transactions. And this was actually used in many of the research about dark markets. But we took a different approach. So what we took is that since Bitcoin is the main cryptocurrency that's being used, it is universally accepted in these markets, and it is anonymous, kinda. We will show how this is not really, yeah, anyhow. So it's anonymous. You don't need an identification. Anyone can use it, and people feel a bit safe about using it on these markets because they don't have identification, and it can be used by anyone. So this is the good thing from the terms of the dark markets and from the terms of the users. But for us, what is really, really good at it is that it's a public ledger, which means that we can have all the transactions that happened on the dark markets and they are all available for us. So we can have a better visibility of this kind of transaction. So now we have this public ledger. Publicly, what you can see or what you can get is the following. A bunch of hashed addresses, which is a bunch of letters and numbers, sending to another hashed addresses, and you can get the exact timestamp, and you get the amount in Bitcoin. But this is not going to be very helpful for us because we want to focus on dark markets transactions. How can we know that this specific transaction was to a dark market? And here what comes a problem that's generally in blockchain and Bitcoin specifically. First, how can we group? By how can we group is that, so here we had this bunch of addresses, right? And you can see that you have 2 addresses here sent to. So if I have each node of these, each node that I have here is an address, can we group this address? Can we claim that all of these addresses belong to one identity? And that actually these 2 addresses is actually one person? So this is the first problem. The second problem is, how can we label? So can I say, for example, that the white node belongs to a specific person or a specific dark market? So this is the second problem. Can I say that this one belonging to Silk Road Marketplace? So what we actually want to have is that transferring from this kind of shape is to merge these 2 addresses together to one identity and say, is this 2 addresses belong to Silk Road? Ideally, this is what we want to have. And that's why we teamed up with Chain Analysis. So Chain Analysis is a blockchain company that's specialized in blockchain intelligence, and this is what they do. They try to solve this complicated problem and relying, of course, on many heuristics that are already available in the research. And what we have is that we got a data set that's saying that we have a source, we have a destination, and some of these destinations are identified, or some of these sources are identified to a specific identity of a dark market. And that's how we got our data set. So what we have is that we have 69 different dark markets that spans the time from 2011 till July 2019. And we particularly focus on 23 markets of these, and we will show you why and how did we pick these 23 markets. And in total, what we have is 356 million transactions. So we have transactions that's happening within all of these dark markets, and the nodes or the users that are transacting with the dark market, all of their transactions as well. So these are the markets that we are focusing on. So why did we focus on these specific markets? You will find here that there is 4 different reasons, or like 4 different categories for the bars. And the reason is, it's not always the case that a closure happens because law enforcement closes a market. So in many cases, actually the majority of the cases, the admin just run with the money, which do what's called a scam. So they continue accumulating the money and taking the user's money. Then you go online and you find it's shut down. What does this mean? It means that the admin took your money and ran away. You have another situation which is called voluntary, and the voluntary means that there was a problem in the website. So there was some sort of a hack, or they have some sort of an attacks, and they are unable to run the market anymore. So what they do, they just put a sign on their website saying, we are having some troubles, and can you please take your money and go to other market or do whatever you want to do. These are very few cases. It only happens twice. The majority are the scams and then the raids. So when we picked our markets, we wanted to have diversity of regions of closures. We wanted to cover raids and scam and voluntary, and as well consider some of the markets that are still active till now. And this is what I want to show you, is that on January, we have a 78% coverage of the total trading volume of the markets. So overall, we are considering the most important, the most influential dark markets also in our consideration. So across the time, you can see that we have a good coverage of the overall trading volume. So let's talk first about the first point, which is the effectivity of closure. So as we said, every time there is a closure, so every vertical line is a closure, you can still say that the number of markets still grows and still continues. You have a dip right after the closure for the market that lost, but then you have a continuation of new markets coming. And this really does not matter if you have a scam, if you have a raid, or if you have a voluntary. In all cases, markets continue to come back. And then you look at the US dollars. So this is the total trading volume in all dark markets. And no matter how there is a closure happening, you can see that there is a quick recovery of the trading volume that's coming from all trading in all these dark markets. So there is a quick recovery from closure to the trading on these markets. So then we go deeper to the question of the adoption of mechanisms. So how do they recover that fast from the closures? Okay. So what we are going to have here is that we are going to propose, or we're going to describe what is a migration process. So we are having a situation where Silk Road is a marketplace that's about to be closed. And we have Sheep Marketplace, that another market that was coexisting while Silk Road is about to close. And we have here a bunch of users who are trading and transacting with Silk Road, and another bunch of users who are transacting with Sheep Marketplace. And as you can see, you have these we are going to call the Silk Road market users. You can also, so now we have a dark market that's closed, which is Silk Road. You can see that these two nodes, or two users, moved from the Silk Road market to Sheep Marketplace to trade with them. So previously, they were not trading with Sheep Marketplace, but now they are. But you have these two other users. They are not migrants. They did not move to trade on Sheep Marketplace. And most importantly, we have this user who was previously trading with Sheep Marketplace before the closure of Silk Road. Even if it continued trading with Sheep Marketplace after the closure, we don't consider migrants. So we only consider migrants are the users who moved to interact with Sheep Marketplace after the closure of Silk Road. Okay? However, it's still a Silk Road market user. So what we can see here in this figure is the flows of migration between all the markets that have closed. We start from Silk Road on the top, and then we can read this figure clockwise according to ordered by the closure time. So you can see that Silk Road closed, nodes and users moved to Sheep Marketplace. Then Sheep Market closed, users moved to Silk Road Marketplace and Black Bank Market. Then we have Silk Road to Market, continued to move to Agora and to Middle East Marketplace. So in every time there is a closure, you can see that the rows and the inflows of migration from one market to another market. Okay? Then we ask ourselves, so what is the activity of the market users? How it's influenced and affected by the closure? So we look at all the market users of the particular market user, and then we ask ourselves how these users stop interacting or return to interact after the closure. So before day of closure, so at time 0, we are looking at all of the market, the average activity of all the market users, and if they are returning or not and interacting with all the markets existing at this point. After the time of closure, we are still looking at if these market users are active or not. So are they returning to interaction with other markets or not? And we can see that there is a decline that's happening in the activity of the number of users after the closure. So this is problematic. So this means that we should just give up on the question. So this is why we looked at, instead of just looking at the activity, we looked at how much trading volume is increasing in the coexisting markets. So we looked at the total trading volume for all the coexisting markets, and we scaled it according to the time of death. And we found that, on average, the coexisting markets increase more than 12 times its value at the time of the death of another market. So in other words, when a market closes, the coexisting markets that living with it gain, on average, 12 its time of trading volume after the closure. And it's important to note that here we have a log scale, and here we don't have a log scale. So and here we are starting at the time of after the death, and here is the time before the closure. So here the time after the closure, and this is the time before closure. Does it? Okay. Then we continue wondering about the user's activity. So what do we do? So if we have such an increase in the coexisting markets, and we see that they are increasing a lot in their trading volume, we wonder if are these migrants, are these nodes who migrate, are really stronger, influential ones or not? So we partition our users to 2 types. Users that migrated and users that did not. So we have here the users that migrants, and we have their users that were Silk Roads, but they did not migrate. And we start to characterize their activity in terms of their trading volume. So we look at their overall activity and their activity with the dark market. So here, what we can see is that this is the medians of the activity, the total US dollars that the migrants and the non-migrants trade with dark markets. And you can see that the median is always higher for the migrant nodes. So the median for all migrant nodes is around 30,871. On the other hand, for the non-migrants, it's around 456. So it's a very big difference. And then we start looking at their all-in transaction. Are they generally active in the blockchain? Are these migrants are active? And we again find that consistently they are active in many of the cases that we see here. So what we want to say from this is that not only these migrants are causing the coexistence of other markets to increase their trading volume, but they are also influential one with high trading volume. Finally, we start to ask questions about the decision dynamics. So we want to ask, how do users move from a market that closed to other markets? So here we ask ourselves, or here we show an example of a specific market called Alpha Bay market. And we look, while Alpha Bay market closed, there was many other markets open. And we first ask ourselves, do users move to one market or do they diverse? Like we have 20% in Hansa, 20% in Dream, 20% in Wall Street, or do they concentrate in one market? And what we find is that in all cases, not only in Alpha Bay market cases, the average that 71% of the users move to only one market. So there is one market that 71% on average of the users choose to go to. So what does this mean? So we have, again, similar to the figure that we had before. And what we do is that when a market closes, we look at the top destination, for the migration. So here we have Alpha Bay closed. We have Hansa and Dream and Wall Street open. We look at the market that absorbed the highest number of migrants. So in this case, Hansa market absorbed the highest number of markets. And this is going to be our top destination. Then we look at the second one that got the highest number of migrants, and we'll call it the second top destination, which in this case is Dream market. Then we look how much of the trading volume of these markets increased due to the closure of Alpha Bay market. And we do this process for all markets that closed. So in this case, you can see, closer. So in this case, you can see that the markets closed, and then the top destination and the second top destination immediately increased days after the closure. The top destination, on average, increased fourfolds of the trading volume, and the second top destination, on average, twofolds of its volume. So the migration process aided these coexisting markets in order to gain a lot of trading volume after the other market closure. Actually, it is a very interesting observation that even when a market closes, the other markets in the ecosystem know that there is going to have a lot of users, that some of them scam afterwards because they know that they are going to absorb lots of users. Then we ask ourselves, so if they choose to go to a specific market, how do they decide on going to this specific market? So here what we do, we characterize each coexisting market according to multiple features. I'm here showing two specific features, which is the total US dollar, trading volume in US dollars, and the overlapping. By overlapping users or common users, it means that, so Alpha Bay is closed, Hansa is open. How many of the users who were interacting on Alpha Bay were also interacting on Hansa market before the closure of Alpha Bay? And in this case, we are ranking all the markets according to these features. So the market with the highest trading volume at the time of closure of Alpha Bay is Russian anonymous marketplace. The second one is Hansa market, and so on. And I also do the same thing for the common users rank. Why I'm stressing specifically unboxing these two markets? Because these are Russian markets. And it's not that I have a problem, but it's just in Russian. They are making it a bit harder for English users and non-Russian speakers to be using it. And we will see the influence on this on our analysis. So after we rank this, the markets, we ask ourselves, how many number of times across all the closures users decided to move to this specific market? So in case of Alpha Bay market, when did the users all decide to go to Russian anonymous marketplace because this is the top one? Or did they decide to go to Hansa marketplace, which was the second top? And we do this for each closure. So collectively, how the users decided to choose between the different markets. Okay? So here's what we do. We look at the common user ranks, and So we look at the probability of having, chosen the top ranked in terms of the US dollar or trading volume. And we find that on average, 33% of the time, users chose to go to the top ranked market. And what is the random mean? What's the random choice? Why we're comparing with the random choice? Because we were wondering if they just moved to all of the markets or they moved to one market randomly. And how did we construct the random? Is that we look at every time how many number of markets are closed or open. How many markets that open during the closure. And we say that it's equally likely to move to any of these markets. Then you can see that in case of trading volume rank, surprisingly, the top market that they go to is the second ranked. So they chose not to go to the top ranked in terms of the trading volume, but the second top rank. However, if you remove the Russian markets from the rank, so if you correct for this, you will find they are very unsurprisingly going to the top ranked. So the problem that when we don't see this, when we don't consider this in our ranking, you will find that, well, why they are all going to the second and specifically. But once you remove from your analysis the Russian markets, you will find them normally going to the other top rank, to the first top ranked market. Okay. It's a really quick one. So what are the takeaways that I want to stress here? First is that market closure has almost no effect on the trading volume. They quickly recover after the closure from whatever closure it is. The second thing is that users rapidly migrate to existing marketplace. So they immediately go to other markets. In all of the other figures that we've seen, it was days from closure. They don't even wait for weeks to migrate. The third thing is that influential users are mobile. So the users that we have seen who migrated are actually very influential. They are, on average, are generally more active with the dark markets and generally in the blockchain. And finally is that it is possible to predict where these influential users are going to. This is still work in progress. So there are more that we would like to work on. For example, complete coverage to look more into other markets as well. The behavior between different types of closures. So for example, here we see that whatever the closure is, they do have the same, more or less, behavior. But this is really true? Like, for example, do they lose trust after scam, but in raid they are just a bit worried? So we need to characterize it more. What is the different types of closure effect? And finally, the user level adaptation dynamic. So more on the user side, not only collectively, how do they decide to move? So these are my great collaborators, Andrea Baronchelli, my supervisor from City University, and Alex Teitelbaum, who is here today and from Oxford University. And here are the chain analysis people, and they are all helped me for the data analysis. And thank you very much, and if you have any questions.
Totally extraordinary. Questions for Abeer?
So I'm wondering, so you talk about the sellers on the markets as you could identify their, like there would be accounts. We know that in Bitcoin, anyone can set up any number of accounts, and it is possible that sellers may actually have different accounts with different marketplaces, and they just like move business between. So I'm guessing that what you did is you look at addresses, changing the trade connections, right? The transaction connections with different marketplaces. Mm-hmm. So wouldn't you have a bias against those who would be single homing initially, and then they are moving their business, and they probably are not the most sophisticated ones, because the common advice is not to just use the same address, seller address all the time for transactions, versus the ones who are not migrants. They disappear from your sample, but the trade may not necessarily disappear. They are just directing it to a different node.
Yeah.
Did you see a bias in that?
Yeah, I think yeah, that's a very good question. So of course, there are some we are going to lose their visibility because they change their address, they use more sophisticated methods in order to transfer. However, after all, the clustering hopefully is capable of doing this merging between addresses. So it can predict that after a while, when this address communicated with Hansa market after the closure alphabet still belongs to the original market. So it's still, even the address, if they had a new address, still we are capable of associated and label it to the original seller. And this is at least the first assumption. The second thing is that we are looking at increasing some of the clustering methods in order to be able to see this better. So what if we assume that a market, that the address that started to interact there and it happened to be interacting once with the other addresses from the other market, it can actually be merged or not. We cannot take it into consideration fully, because in this case, we might be having already introducing also a bias that we are saying this one belongs to it, but it does not. But we at least can associate some sort of risk score to this clustering and see if our results are still the same or not.
Yeah. Hi, I want to ask, how would you comment these Bitcoin mining companies affect the dark market, like they are good or bad or they are neutral?
So we did not investigate different services influencing these specific dark markets. It's a good question. However, we are more focused on entities that are not big services, so not exchanges, for example, and not to identify specifically the behavior of a specific service. But yeah, it's a thing to look for.
Thank you. This is a microphone? Oh, that's cool. I guess my question is, what's the economic value? Like, how many dollars in transactions are there in these dark markets? And is that value growing a lot over time?
Yeah, so for example, in case in Silk Road, just the seized amount, and that was in 2011, it was around $32 million. And it's every time, it's growing. On average, I don't have a specific numbers to tell you what is it right now, but it's a growing value. And I think the latest seizure also accounted to hundreds of millions, so it is a growing value.
Further questions? Huh? I'm not going to throw it. You're holding coffee.
Are these dark markets, are they places where buyers and sellers can be linked together, or are they more like Target, where they have a nice shelf of opium and a nice shelf? I mean, how do they actually function?
Yeah, there are different kind of systems. So there are some markets which each trader or each seller has their own kind of profile and telling you what kind of things I can sell you, and having all the kind of details. And it's like Facebook for drug dealers, and you can just go to them and communicate with them directly. But in other cases, it's just like a listings where you can just pick, and you cannot really see much details about the seller. In some cases, you can send directly to the seller your accounts and your information, or like your delivery address and your payment. In other cases, it's a kind of PayPal kind of thing, so you have to send through the dark market. In other cases, you can use escrow services. There is not a unified kind of system. for each of these dark markets. So they have different kind of operating systems. Yeah.
So do the people who operate these markets make money by taking a percentage of transactions?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, they scam you and just get the money back. In
That's not a real market.
yeah,
Fake market.
it seems so. Yeah.
That on the sidewalk also.
Yeah. So. Yeah, so some of them, yes, facilitate, and some of them are just a bunch of libertarians who like to facilitate people, like, I don't know, happiness. I don't know.
Thank you.
All right, on that note, let's thank the speaker again.